and she mentioned a couple of other schools. But when she talked to her parents about it, they told her that it was astounding. All these people didn't have anything to eat and anything to drink. And what her parents were focusing on was getting food to these people. I found it just so fascinating. It's probably going to be a great subject to discuss that whole thing, to get Connie to talk about that whole period and any other people that might have been there. What I was doing at that time was getting ready to graduate. I graduated LIU in 1970 and I went into the family business, Gold's, in 1970. And I was there with my brother and my two cousins until 2015 when we sold the company. I'm going to talk a little bit about what went on at the beginning. This is what Gold's horseradish looked like. This is the jar that probably all of you recognize and you've had in your refrigerator for all those years. This bottle was changed after the company was purchased by LaSalle Capital out of Chicago, and they purchased the company. They changed the label, which I was fine with, and my brother and cousins were fine with. We always talked about updating the label a little bit. These are the four types of horseradish that we had: the red, the white, extra hot, and the sweet. We started in 1932. This is in Brownsville in 1932, and this is just a street. And isn't it a great barbershop hole? And this wasn't the street that we started on, but a cousin of my grandfather rented the space on the sidewalk from the store owner. He rented that spot, and that's where this cousin would grind horseradish. It had a grinder, and people would come by, and if they wanted horseradish, he would grind it for them. Well, the cousin of my grandfather got into a fight with the landlord, that is the store owner, the person that I guess owned the street or owned the rights to the cousin got into a fight about rent. Fisticuffs, cousin thrown in jail. My grandfather bailed him out. Now, in those times, it was a very difficult time due to the Depression, and my grandmother had three small children, three small sons, and she thought that it might be a good idea to add some extra dollars. Let's grind horseradish in the house. What you're looking at here is what the street looked like where the cousin was peddling with the grinder in Brownsville. That's what it looked like during the day when it was all bustling. But my grandmother, this picture shows her with my father over here, Marc Gold, and my Uncle Manny and my Uncle Herb. This is my grandmother, Tillie Gold. This is my grandfather with the same three boys. Hyman Gold, this is my father, Marc Gold, and Manny and Herb Gold. So this is about the time when they started the business. My father looks like he's about, I would say he looks like he's about 10, 11 years old, which is when my grandmother decided to grind the horseradish in her kitchen. And she spooned it into little bottles with my grandfather. And my grandfather would sell it in a push cart on the street. Now, I once told this story, and I referred to my grandfather as a peddler, that he peddled it on the street. And my father got very upset. He was concerned about the legacy of his father, my grandfather. And he said, your grandfather was not a peddler. He was a businessman. He was a businessman that didn't sell to people on the streets. He sold to stores. He would go to one store after another, selling a few bottles of horseradish and said, keep it fresh. I'll come back for sell you another 3 bottles when you need it. We'll keep turning it over. This way the product will be fresh. It was made with horseradish vinegar and salt. That was it. And red was made with beets. And that's how we started the business, with my grandfather selling it in stores throughout the Brooklyn area, wherever he could get to in the area of the house, which was at 832 Coney Island Avenue. Any former Brooklynites out there might know Coney Island Avenue. At the foot of Dorchester Road is where my grandparents lived, and that's where they ground the horseradish. That's what the horseradish looked like. It wasn't in color, but I guess it was in color, but there are no pictures of colored, beautiful looking horseradish, but that's what it looked like. My grandmother, this is the backyard of that 832 Coney Island Avenue. That's hanging on there is not clothes out to dry. That's horseradish roots. She had washed the horseradish roots in a big bathtub that they had in the apartment, and they would wash the roots there, and she would hang it out to dry. And the window is also open because when you grind horseradish or cut horseradish, as soon as you cut the roots, the fumes come out. It's worse than an onion, but it's great. It's invigorating. It's almost like it's a natural high of some sort. And I've experienced the grinding of horseradish roots and cutting of roots my whole life. That's why that window was open, to let those fumes out. This is what the bottle looked like as the years went by. This is my grandfather's naturalization papers when he became a citizen. This is when they moved from Coney Island Avenue to 4127 18th Avenue. This is 18th Avenue, across street from East 2nd Street in Brooklyn, not far from McDonald Avenue. They had moved from 832 because they just needed more room. They could no longer use my grandmother's kitchen as a factory. They couldn't do it anymore. They had to go to, and so behind this storefront, there was a factory where they ground the horseradish. My father told me a story back when they were a kid. This is World War II, circa 1941 or 42. But my father tells me a story about he would go with my grandfather and they would each take 2 satchels of horseradish roots. And they would get on the train and take the train to Astoria. Astoria was where my grandfather had a route where he used to, when he was selling life insurance from New York Metropolitan Life Insurance, and he would, when one of his customers couldn't make their payments, he would pay for them. So the chief at New York Life didn't like that and decided to fire my grandfather, who was also a radio repairman, radio technician, very good with electronics. And what my grandfather did was, that's when they got started with the horseradish. So he had this route in Astoria. And my father and my grandfather had 2, you can picture them carrying 2 satchels of roots. They got on the train, they went to Astoria. My grandfather took 2 satchels and he went out on the street and sold them, came back and took the other 2 satchels from my father and sold the other 2 satchels. My father was probably 14 at the time. I said, Dad, why did you make Poppy go out and do all the selling and carrying the roots? And my father said, by me handing my 2 satchels over to him after he completed the selling of the 2, I didn't have to pay another subway fare. I handed it over the turnstile, and the subway fare was the profit of the day. This is what it looked like in the backyard of 4127 18th Avenue. What you see here, that's my grandfather. This is, like I said, it's probably around 1942, somewhere in that period. My father was a staff sergeant in the Army Air Corps. And that's my grandfather Hyman, my father Morris. This is the backyard, and you know what all this stuff is? It's horseradish roots. They grew it in the backyard. Sure, they had other farmers in Brooklyn, actually, and other farmers on Long Island that they bought roots from, but they also grew the roots in the backyard. And if you look closely at these roots, it seems like they're out of control. Like there's no hoarding them, gathering them in. And that's one of the reasons that people give as horseradish being called that, the galloping root. It was a galloping root because it grew wild. Hence horseradish. This is a truck that we had in the 50s on 18th Avenue. This is the production line. Although my grandmother, when she would fill it in the jars, she would take a small bottle and she would take a funnel, if you could picture it, a funnel put into the bottle, a funnel put into the bottle. She would put the horseradish in the funnel and then she would shake the bottle and the horseradish would go into the bottle. It would just shoot right down into the bottle. By shaking it, it went down into the bottle. And my father, the way he tells his story, it was amazing how fast she could do that. At any rate, when they got a filling machine, my grandmother said, why did you get a filling machine? I'm a filling machine, which was amazing. But she always worked. She was always in the factory. This is the first machine I remember. There's a wider view of this. This is the production line. If you can see up here, this is the equivalent of that funnel that my grandmother had, a teeny funnel. This is where the horseradish would be dumped into here and it would be filled. The bottles would be filled. It would continue around to the capping machine where this is a capper. This is a hopper where you throw the caps in. Bottles would get capped and it would go to the labeling machine. This is the labeler. It would go around the labeling machine. The person would stand there, and that person would put the jars in the boxes and stack them on a pallet. So you had two people running machines. And my earliest memories are standing at the beginning of the machine, of the line, and the only way that we marked the difference of a box of red and a box of white horseradish was by putting a line across the box, a red line. And my father gave me this red marker. I must have been 6, a red marker. And when we made red, I would score that line across the box. I got such a great charge out of it. It was almost thrilling to be so involved, and I was actually felt productive. And someone had to do it, and it was an easy thing to do. It didn't cost my father and my uncles and grandparents too much, but that's what I did. As I got older, there would be times when, before I got involved in the business, this was in the mid-'60s, when someone wouldn't show up to work. And it would be during pre-Passover or before Rosh Hashanah, or it might have been before the Thanksgiving, Christmas, when we were off from school. And my father would call up and he'd say, "George didn't come in today. We need you to come." So I grabbed my brother, who was a couple of years younger than me. My cousins lived 2 blocks away. I lived in East 103rd Street in Canarsie at the time. And we'd grab my cousins who lived on 105th Street, and the 4 of us, my brother Jason, he was much younger than us, so he wasn't involved in that stuff. Later on, he helped out also, but at that time he didn't. But the 4 of us would go into get on the bus on Remsen Avenue to Forster Avenue, down to 18th Avenue, and we'd stand by the line. And the person that put the jars on the production line also had an auxiliary job. You had to make sure that you didn't run out of caps. You run out of caps, you want to get caps. God forbid my father should walk out into the plant and see jars coming by without caps. You had to monitor this spot right here and put the caps in. It was a big box, and it had to be dumped in. And you had to dump it in just right, because if you didn't dump it in just right, you would have caps flying asunder all over the place, and can't let that happen. The other job we did was take the bottles off at the end of the line and put it into boxes. And that also had an auxiliary job, and that was to watch the labeler. Now, watching the labeler was critical. Labels came in 1,000 labels to a pack, about the size as a pack of labels. And as the labels went down, you'd constantly be looking off to the side and watching it as you're putting the bottles in the boxes. Look, and when the labels went down, then it was time for the person that was taking the bottles off and putting into the boxes to make a mad dash to the labeler, to pick up the label holder, stuff in the back of labels, put the holder back down, and run back to the line and not miss a jar. And I'm not sure what was worse, missing the jar or seeing the labels go everywhere. Now, if you thought caps were rough, can you imagine labels going into the glue pot and sticking on everywhere, and you have to yell out, "Hold up the line." And if my father or one of my uncles would come out while this was going on, we'd never hear the end of it. That was critical stuff. And you couldn't waste a minute. You could not waste a minute. Work started at typically 7 o'clock. When we would get there, it would be whenever we get there, when they would call us in to help. 12 o'clock, everything stopped at noon, and it was a half hour for lunch. But after lunch, it just kept going on and on and on. If you were feeding the glass on the front end, and you'd see another pallet of glass being drawn or brought over, and you use another pallet, it never would end, never. I don't think it's ended. That was because we always were so careful not to overproduce. We always made sure that we had enough that was going to be used for the next couple of days, so we didn't stock up. So when the production list was made, we had to get to that, at least that amount of cases. So it just went on and on. That was the real beginning of horseradish upbringing for me. This is the borscht line. We manufactured borscht also. In this picture, you see my grandmother, that's Bobby Tillie Gold, and my father, Morris, and they're at the borscht line. My earliest memories of making borscht were watching it filled in the kettles, and after it was filled in the kettles, it was boiling hot. When the borscht was made, it was boiling, and it was too hot to handle. just barely manageable to take the bottle off and put it in a bushel. You couldn't go into the labeler with it. The labeler was a hand labeler where you would take the jar, put it on the label, and the other jar, take it out and put it in the box. Take the label, the jar, put it in the labeler, take it out, put it in the box. So it had to cool off to do that. So we would put it in bushels the whole night, and then the next morning, the borscht would be labeled. That's what horseradish cost in 1945, 85 cents a dozen. Does anyone know what you're paying for horseradish now? I don't know if you're the shopper in the family. It's like $2.50 for a jar, not for a dozen. This is 4127 18th Avenue. This is, if you know the area, up here is Ocean Parkway. And back here is McDonald Avenue. If you can picture that, if you know Borough Park, Flatbush, McDonald Avenue, where the Culver Theater used to be, that's Gold's right here. That's where we were. And this picture is a fascinating picture. Let me take a close-up of that one. Because you see here, this is the vinegar truck, Baker's Vinegar, delivering vinegar. The pictures are all of us are blocking it up a little bit. This is the Pierce glass truck that's delivering glass. So you have the vinegar coming in, the glass coming in. You have the truck from the farmer that had horseradish roots. You have our step fan, and there's that poor woman over here. If you could see her over there, she doesn't know what to do. How can she get by here? She doesn't know what to do. Love that. Always loved that picture. My father always believed in advertising as much as you can. He would go to the different butchers and different retail shops and put up signs. And this is a Gold's, get Gold's horseradish, and put it up in the sign. And the shopkeeper, they because it meant that the store, it was a plug to someone that not only wanted meat and poultry, but also if they wanted horseradish, they can get it there. And my father would put the signs up everywhere. And that's where I learned about advertising and promoting, how important it was to get your name out there all the time. Perception is so important. It just gives the feeling of the perception of being bigger than you are. If you just, and so we always advertise. This is actually a Gold's borscht birth announcement, which is in 1948. And what's interesting about this picture, about borscht, on my mother's side, my maternal grandparents, they were in the pickles and mayonnaise business. And my grandfather, that's my maternal grandfather, the Sparrows, he got a request to make borscht from someone. It was Horowitz Margaretin. I don't know if anyone knows that name. Horowitz was a big name in the kosher food business, and they wanted borscht made for them. And my grandfather had a small boiler, but he didn't want to get into it. He was too busy with the pickles and mayonnaise, and that's that part of the business. He said to my father, who was just married, to his daughter, take this boiler and take this order from Horowitz Margaretin and see what you can do with it. And my father and his brothers always jumped at any opportunity like that. And hence, on this date, August 4th, 1948, they sent out a letter saying, we are pleased to announce a new product by Gold's. On August 4th, borscht. So it's an actual birth announcement for borscht, right? It is crystal clear. A new product by Gold's, birth announcement. Love it. These are decals that were put on. My father and my two uncles made sure that all of the cars had these decals on the back. Advertise, advertise, advertise. This is an early ad that they did with borscht. And the idea was borscht is not a soup only, that it's a nice cold drink with ice in it, and maybe put a little vodka in it, although they didn't advertise the vodka, which would be, it's great. Vodka and borscht, it's a borscht belt. It's amazing. They started that ad off just because looking for new business, new types. Sure, borscht and sour cream in a plate, delicious. But what about in the glass as a cold drink? This is interesting because this is what is this? Who can tell me what that is? It's a beatnik. I can't ask questions and get answers, but this is a beatnik. I mean, we all know that. You see the beret and the bongos, and you see far out girl with a beret also, and he's got the shades on. I was going to read the definition of a beatnik. It's a person who participated in the social movement of the 50s and 60s, early 60s, which stressed artistic self-expression and the rejection of the mores of a conventional society. It's usually a young and artistic person who rejects the mores of conventional society. So my father, talking about thinking out of the box, let's get all the beatniks to drink borscht. This is an amazing thing. They came up with an ad. Now, doesn't that look like a beatnik? You got a bottle of borscht with a beret on it, sunglasses, get cool, man. Much of a difference? Looks like the same thing, right? But that's the ad that they came up with to try to get new business, not necessarily to get beatniks to use Gold's borscht, but it was the angle to get cool, man, to use something different. It was hip to drink borscht. It wasn't an old person's thing. It was for now, which borscht was. And I believe it's coming back now. That's what, I love that stuff. This is what Gold's borscht looks like now, although the new people, I believe they sold it again. That's what borscht, and my son, what he did this he worked with us in the 2000s. What is it, 2020? Geez. Probably around 2010, 11. He came up with a t-shirt, which on one side says "Get Cool, Man," and the other side is that old ad that my father generated. This is my father when he was on To Tell the Truth in 1958. Did everything to promote. That's me, my father, and my younger brother. That's my father, Morris. I'm on a bicycle and I'm having a great time. Look at that. It's like the Mets just won the pennant. I'm so happy. And my brother's kvetching. Why he's kvetching? My brother Steve, I don't know. He's always a kvetch, still is a kvetch. But that's the two of us back in 1953. My other brother, Jason, was born in 1955. He never got involved in the business. He became a bankruptcy lawyer in Virginia, which came in handy as a lot of the supermarket chains went out of business. Bohack, Hills, to name a couple. This is McDonald Avenue. We moved to McDonald Avenue in 1950. Being in my father's car, and he would watching the bricks go up, watching the bricklayers. I was so fascinated by that. We were on McDonald Avenue from 1956 until 1993. 1956 to 1993. That's when we moved to Hempstead. Actually, at the beginning of 94, we were in Hempstead. These are some of our trucks that we had back in Brooklyn. Talk about advertising. You thought Miss America was interesting or Miss Universe? 1951, I don't know if this could work now, but we had a Miss Horseradish contest. A Miss Horseradish contest, for God's sake. That's my Uncle Manny's doing. Advertising, as much as we could do to advertise. Miss Horseradish. 1952, we did even better, another Miss Horseradish contest. And that's Mr. Horseradish is what my uncle is holding, Mr. Horseradish. And I think that was what Miss Horseradish got as a prize, a couple of bottles of horseradish. But that's always advertising, always promoting. This is Times Square. And it's Times Square in 1961. How do I know it's 1961? See that movie? The Birds is coming. We all remember Hitchcock's The Birds. That was scarier than Psycho. I just saw that the other night. That is the scariest thing. If you haven't seen The Birds, see it. The way that ends is it's mind-boggling. The birds are still out there. And that's a television ad from Admiral. But who's on that television screen? Jackie Gleason. So here's Fleischmann's, I guess it was Scotch is what they had. But here we were on the same advertising vehicle as Jackie Gleason, Alfred Hitchcock, and Needix. Needix was probably the first of the fast food outfits that I could remember, Needix was great. They were as big sponsors of Knicks way back. And always advertised. This is a blow up of that picture. We had the 4 bottles of horseradish. We sold it to all the chains. We sold it to Wallbounds, Pathmark, A&P, Food Fair, Stop and Shop, Publix. Wallbounds. I was once hit with the curse of the stolen parking lot. What's the curse of the stolen? This is typically a Wallbound store that was on the street. You see, it's on the street with cars right in front of it. This is a pretty old picture from the 50s. And when I was working with the company, it was already in the mid-70s, early 70s when I got started. And I was mostly involved in sales and shipping. Those are my assignments. And I was coming back from work. I was coming back from stores out on Long Island or out in Queens, and there was a store on 18th Avenue right around the corner from the plant. And I said, let me run into that store. It's because it was before Passover, because let me check the store to see if everything is out on the shelf. Because you had to have if you didn't have the product on the shelf, when the shopper comes into it, you're doomed. Lost sale. Maybe she'll come back, but maybe not. And the peak of horseradish selling, it's such a brief window when it opens up before Passover. Passover is on April 15th. The selling is going to start April 2nd, April 3rd, especially for the perishable items. It gets closer to the date of the first Seder. And you have to have all that product in there. And you have to have a dairy manager that knows to ramp up what he has, to have more than what he would normally carry, because suddenly selling something that's selling at 1 or 2 cases a week is going to go up to 5, 6 cases a day or more. And you had to be prepared. So one of my responsibilities was to get to the stores and make sure they're all ready. Anyway, I'm racing back to the office, the plant on McDonald Avenue, which is right around the corner where that wall bounds is. Picture this store on 18th Avenue. And I saw parking's impossible. I know parking's impossible at the stores that are on the streets. And I saw a car pulled out, and there was another car that was right and ready to back into the spot. And I'm coming from the other direction. What's the worst thing that you can do as far as parking space etiquette? The worst thing that you can do is to front in while someone's waiting to back in. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. It's not part of the rules of life. You don't front in while someone's backing in. There was a young lady, a woman was backing in, and I said, but I had to go into the store. And I got parked in the spot. I pulled in, and she's looking at me. And I said, I'm really sorry. I'll just go in for a minute. I'm really sorry. And I went into the store, and she said, into the store, she put the curse of the stolen parking spot on me. She said, whenever you fight with your wife, you'll think of me. This is what I looked like in my glory days I guess around mid-90s. Pathmark was a great chain. They were a great chain, and they went down the tubes after a while. They were mishandled by A&P. A&P mishandled Pathmark. Getting back to wall bounds, though. Interesting story with wall bounds. What I would do, I would go out to their office in Central Islip before a peak period, and I would customize distributions to the stores. They had confidence in me, as the wall bounds would, because they knew I didn't want to hurt them. I only was concerned about doing what's good for us. And by hurting them and giving them too much stuff, that hurts us, because then you have overload of horseradish in the stores. The stores get spoiled. The shopper eats spoiled horseradish. They'll come back. It'll still be in the same. There'll still be a lot there. They'll buy another bottle that's bad. Twice. Bad. Doomed. You're done. So it was important for me to tell wall bounds, give them my opinion as to how much product you're going to each store. You're not going to send a lot of red into a store in Bedford-Stuyvesant, just like in a store on Ralph Avenue back then was big Jewish area, you would sell a lot of red. But if you send too much red to one store gets burnt, you wind up getting hurt. So I put together a massive distribution covering, they had about 120 stores, of my opinion, 5 different items. Horseradish, 3 varieties, and 2 different sizes. Come up to the office, and I knew the guy Ira Savoy. Knew him very well. He formerly was a craft salesman. He was a very nice guy as a craft salesman. Once he became a wall bounds buyer, he had clout, and he just had so much power as Ira had. I went up there with my distribution. I sat in the office waiting for my turn to go in there, and you would wait for a long time until your appointment was, they kept you waiting. I went in with my pieces of paper. I had my distribution all nicely put together and how much to go to each store. And I handed it to Ira. And he took the distribution and he goes like this, and he throws it away. Now, I had spent hours putting this together and having it typed, and it was like pre-computer, so you couldn't have enough whiteout, and you had to make copies, and with mimeograph paper and with carbon paper. And I don't know if anybody remembers carbon paper, but it was difficult to get things. I spent a lot of time in it, and I didn't know what to do. He was in Central Islip, and our office place was in Brooklyn. Quite a trip to get out to Central Islip. I like almost started crying. I didn't know what to do. I got up and I walked into the waiting room. I walked to the door and I started walking down the steps to go to my car. And I said, no, I can't do that. I can't leave. I can't. I went back up the steps and I sat down in the waiting room and just sat there. Sure enough, after about 5 minutes, Ira comes walking in. He's uncrumpling the paper and he says, Mark, come on in. Let's work this out. He needed me as much as I needed him. He wasn't just going to let me walk on that and have to do all of that work himself. I provided a lot of work for him. Wallbaums they did great. They were a great customer. One time with Wallbaums, we were trying to sell duck sauce. We were starting duck sauce. So you get to the picture of duck sauce. You know what duck sauce looks like, that big quart jar of 40-ounce duck sauce. And I told my salesman, when a store wants 10 cases of duck sauce, we were delivering it to the stores then. We were not in the warehouse. To get a product into the Wallbaums warehouse or Stop and Shop warehouse or ShopRite warehouse, that's incredibly important, because then so much of the physical work is handled for you. And a dairy manager has to put in one, and one case gets delivered. Otherwise, you can't deliver one case at a time. We were delivering 10 cases of duck sauce. We delivered to some stores. I delivered 5 to some stores. We were wanted to get started in it. I told my salesman to give a case free if someone ordered 10. But it was a good idea. It's good for Wallbaums, and I'm getting an incentive for the guy to take 10 cases. It's not a perishable. Wouldn't do it with horseradish. Duck sauce is not a perishable. Doesn't matter. I get a call from Stanley Lang. Stanley Lang was one of the super hot shots at Wallbaums. And he said, I want you to come up and see me. I have a duck sauce issue. They had in Elmont, Stanley Lang and George Brown had their offices, and they ran the stores. All the stores were run from that office. So I go up there and not knowing what to expect. And Stanley says, I understand you're giving free merchandise to my stores. If they order 10 cases, you're giving a case free. And I said, well, isn't that okay? What's wrong with giving free merchandise? And he said, what about my stores that can only use 5 cases? I have 120 children. Should I take care of one more than I should take care of another? I treat all my children the same. You did wrong by doing that. And this is what he told me he was going to do to solve the problem. He said, I'm going to take the duck sauce into the warehouse in Central Islip. I'm going to order 1,000 cases and you give me 100 free. Beautiful. This was beautiful. For us, it was beautiful. Got into the warehouse. I didn't expect that move of giving 1 with 10 to get into the warehouse, but it got us into the Wallbaum warehouse and got us really started with duck sauce. A&P was great before they got too big for their britches, when they started buying out these chains that were so used to handling communities, and they would know they would have different sets. That wasn't a cookie cutter store. When A&P took over Wallbaums, they made every store the same. And they did the same thing with Pathmark. No longer did they customize the store to the community. And that's one of the things that brought it down. But A&P was great on its own. When I would go into an A&P store, they had an IBM computer printout with dots that you would fill in dots. If you wanted 1 case, 2 cases, you would fill it in. And I would never overdo it, because like I said, who am I hurting by overdoing it? Hurting me. And A&P was great the way they handled that. Food Town was another story. For those people that lived on Long Island, you probably know Mel White's Food Town. Mel White's and Ira Wallbaum were bitter enemies. They were major competitors, and they just hated each other. Mel was a great businessman. And what Mel did, he had a sign in his office. The sign said, please make your appointments. If you come in before 5:30 in the morning, no appointment necessary. Great. Who wants to wait? So get to Food Town. His office was in East Rockaway, on East Rockaway Road in East Rockaway. And I would get to see Mel before 5:30. And I would go out to Central Islip. And on the way back from Central Ice, I would stop with my mother's in Oceanside. And that was the greatest. She would love it when I'd come by and she'd whip up lunch, a tuna fish sandwich, whatever she would do. And then she'd have me to talk to, I mean, we all know what it's like to talk to a parent or talk to one of your children and have just unadulterated just conversation, to ask anything you want. And my mother would say, I would say to my mother, ask me anything you want. But that was a circuit that I would make. I would go to Mel, Central Ice with my mother, and back to the place. But Mel said one morning while I was there, I showed him barbecue sauce, new item that we made, 5 kinds of barbecue sauces. And he said, give me 100 cases of each. Break it down into 20 cases per store or 15 cases per store, and I want it in 2 weeks. We hadn't even made the product yet, except for some samples. I called up my brother Steve. I said, Steve, we got an order from Mel. He's taking the barbecue sauce in. He said, what, really? And they made it like in 2 days, and we had all the product ready. Companies don't do that now. And we got started with the barbecue sauce. Mel Weitz was the type of person, if he called you up on a Friday and said one of his stores is out of 8-ounce horseradish and he needs it right away, he expected it. And there was one time where my father lived in Oceanside and the store was in East Rockaway, which is right around the corner. And I said, Dad, could I throw a few cases in the car and you could drop it off at Mel's on your way home? It was a Friday. Traffic from Brooklyn to Long Island. I mean, you can imagine what went on a Friday at 4 o'clock, 4:30. It's impossible. But my father knew that's what you have to do. He taught us to do that. So he knew that was what you had to do. And he did it. Mel called me up one time. He wanted a price for borscht for the holidays. It was Passover. The borscht season typically starts Passover, goes through the summer, ends Rosh Hashanah. That's typically the borscht season in the New York metro area. He called up and said, what's the price on borscht? And I said, whatever it was, $6.95 a case, or $4.95, I don't even remember. He said, it's too much. I want to get a certain retail. I want it to be 25 cents less. And I said, Mel, I can't do it. He said, that's the price I need. I'll get the retail. I'll feature your borscht. You'll sell thousands of cases. Can't do it. It's up to you. He said, okay, you can have the price. So now I had to discuss it with my father. I sold Mel borscht for $4.50. What? I sold Mel borscht for $4. You can't sell it for $4.50. What are we in here just to make Mel Weitz happy? Doesn't it have to be profitable? It wasn't profitable at that price. You better call him back and tell him you can't do it. I can't call Mel back. I can't tell him no after I said yes. I can't. Call him up. Went up and called up Mel. I said, Mel, I can't sell it to you at that price. So you told me you're gonna sell it to me. Can't do it, Mel. He said, okay, cancel the order. I'll get it from someone else. So he gave someone else thousands of cases or whatever it was, a borscht for that particular period. Calls me up again next holiday. And he said, what's your price on borscht? And I said, Mel, I'm really sorry about last time. Sorry. He said, doesn't matter. That was yesterday. It's like it started over again. That's what it was like in the food. But there were no grudges when it came to doing business. I didn't feel any grudges towards us at all at any time. And that's how Mel succeeded. Got the best prices that he could and sold a lot of product. Does anyone know Food Fair, which had another name of Pantry Pride? Should ask Jonathan what supermarket chains he remembers as a kid. Winn-Dixie, I guess, was one of them that you had down there. Well, Food Fair, Pantry Pride, they were a company that we didn't get into the Food Fair warehouse. It was hard with horseradish I'm talking about now. And we were in all of the warehouses, except for Food Fair. Food Fair, we were still delivering to the stores. And this is in the 70s. And we would get a distribution from Lou Goldberg, who was the supervisor for Long Island and Brooklyn and Queens. And would give us a distribution and we would deliver it to the store in a car or in a truck, 5 cases. And there was a little bit of an upcharge, but that's how we were selling Food Fair. I moved to Staten Island shortly after we got married. And it was a Food Fair in Staten Island. And I went into the store and I saw there's no Gold's horseradish. So I said to the dairy manager, why is there no Gold's? How come you don't have Gold's? And he said, I don't know. He said, you have to have Gold's horseradish. Can I send you in 5 cases? He said, sure, send in 5 cases. So I sent in 2 red, 3 white, sent it in. And after a while, our bookkeeper said, Mary Rubenstein was our bookkeeper. And she said, we're not getting paid. for that store in Staten Island and not paying. I said, why not? We're just not getting paid. I called up accounts payable and they said, you're not authorized. What do you mean I'm not authorized? You're not authorized. Your product is not authorized in Staten Island, which means you can't sell it in Staten Island. You need authorization. Someone can't just bring an item into a store and put it on the shelf. So they didn't pay us. But we were able to get a distributor that went into the Staten Island stores and the New Jersey stores, Posnack Distributors, an area of New Jersey, getting authorization, and we opened up that whole area. And from that, we got into the food fair warehouse in Linden, and now all the food fairs in the New York metro area were covered by warehouse, which is the way to get the volume and to make the item really a success. Daitch Shopwell was an old chain that Alfred Daitch was the dairy head of buying. Big guy, very big guy. And what was great about Alfred was that if you came to his office during lunch, he had this big buffet set up for all the buyers and the workers. So if you'd come at 11:45, you'd feast, have a feast, then you'd go see Alfred. Alfred had a refrigerator behind his desk where he kept Shav. He kept Shav. Who likes Shav? Not a lot of people, and no other buyer that I knew liked Shav. Made him so happy by bringing him a case of Shav. It was great. He was a great friend, Alfred Daitch. He also smoked a certain type of cigar. Comes holiday time, we would give out bottles of booze. That would be the thing to give to the supervisors and the buyers and the different chains. We changed that later on. Alfred would give a case of cigars. I changed the booze to pistachio nuts. And that was such a hit. 5-pound bag of pistachio nuts. A buyer would get it. I would have plastered on the top Golds. A sticker would go on it that said Gold's horseradish. And pistachio nuts, 5 pounds of pistachio nuts, lasts a while. And every time they dig in to get nuts, they saw Gold's horseradish. It's a great idea, I thought. Stop and Shop was a wonderful chain. Back then, they only had warehouses in New Haven and Boston. They didn't still do anything in the New York metro area at all back then. So I'm talking about the 70s. But they would order like clockwork every week. They would never overorder. They just handled that company so well, and they still do to this day. Just managed, at least until 2015. I don't know what they've done since then. But all the orders always, and then they opened up warehouses down in the New York metro area as well. That's why Stop and Shop is one of the few chains that's still around now in the New York metro area. Stop and Shop and ShopRite is not much more than that. A lot of the businesses are going to Costco and BJ's and Sam's and some of the others. Some independents, you'll see a Key Food around once in a while, but you don't see that all those supermarket chains. Publix was also another great chain. You probably have Publix when you were down south also, Jonathan. You probably saw some Publix, no? And Publix, what's great about Publix is you couldn't screw around with Publix. But they just screw out once, they'll accept an apology. Twice, you're doomed. They just kick you right out. Publix, our retail in Publix of Gold's horseradish was higher than the competition. And horseradish costs the same to make, give or take a few cents for the most part. Why should the competitor be 20 cents a jar less than Gold's? I went up to the buyer and I had a whole thing with the buyer about that. Why is our retail so high? And he said, we want to make you the high class horseradish, the gourmet horseradish. That's how we have your price higher. So I liked the idea, but I didn't like that it was affecting the volume. Gold's white, red, the cream style, sweet horseradish. These are all the borscht products that we had. This is the duck sauce that I was talking about before. Those great quarts of duck sauce. This is a letter my father got from Mayor Koch in 1987. And the letter said, Dear Morris, the Mayor Koch said, we want you to come to join a small group of distinguished New York City business leaders to meet and talk informally about the city and its future. Son, Ed Koch. My father was so proud of that letter. For the rest of his life, he was proud of that letter. That's one of the logos that we put out our 70th anniversary. This is the Harvester. This is something that I put out for the Harvest Lodge, which was a lodge in B'nai B'rith, which is the food industry's largest lodge in the country, was Harvest Lodge. And I always had this, I liked the writing thing, I had fun with writing. So I was able to become the editor and publisher of making money on it. It cost us. And but that wasn't the point. The point was that this is quite a cause, B'nai B'rith, and I did a story on a Holocaust survivor called Out of the Woods, where he talked about how he was hiding in the woods of Western Czechoslovakia. And it was a whole fascinating story about a coin that was being passed down from his grandfather to his father to him, and the survival of the coin. And I wrote this story, and he happened to be our mashgiach. He was the rabbi who was at the place, making sure that everything was kosher, especially when it's Passover time. He'd have to be more kosher for Passover. But he didn't want his name mentioned. He was still afraid. Gallons of horseradish, we manufactured that. I was on the David Letterman Show, which is a fascinating story. I get a phone call one night about 5 o'clock, and no one was maybe it was 6 o'clock. No one else was in the place except for me. And I answered the phone, and they said that the person who called said, "This is Paul the Kneader from the Late Night with David Letterman Show. Can you tell us the difference between a condiment and a sauce?" So I started babbling. A sauce, you use condiments, you put it together to make a sauce, and the horseradish is a condiment, and you make a horseradish sauce out of it. And I start talking about the history of golds, like I'm doing now. I'm talking and talking and talking and talking. And she says, "Can you come down tomorrow to the studio?" So, not realizing at first what's involved, I said yes. And it wasn't the next day, it was 2 days later. So the next day, I get together, my brother puts together a poster that shows the horseradish pretty much with the filling machine, the labeling machine, the capping machine, the grinding machine. And I take this cardboard poster and I take a bunch of horseradish. Every single time I get on the subway, it was the D train, which is now the F train on McDonald Avenue, and I go into the city. I'm carrying all this stuff, and I go into the city, and I go to was it the Ed Sullivan Theater? I guess it was the first show. I don't know if it was the Ed Sullivan Theater, the first show, the first Letterman. That was when he was on late night at 1 o'clock. Then he was on at 11:30. That's where Steve Colbert is now. I went into with all this stuff, and there's a podium set up. And I never met Letterman, but a podium was set up, and there was a table next to it with all of the stuff that I brought. And they hand me a pointer, and she said to me, "Tell us the difference between a condiment and a sauce." So I start this whole story about that. We started on McDonald Avenue. I started on Cortelli Road off Coney Island Avenue, then to 18th Avenue to McDonald Avenue. This is before we were in Hempstead, we were in Brooklyn. And so I talk about the history of the company and how we make everything and how it's made and the grinder and the filler. And I talk about the duck sauce. I talk about the horseradish. And I just keep going until I needed not water, something stronger than water, but water did. So she said, "Okay, very good. Now do it for the camera." So now I went through the whole spiel again, did the whole thing. As it turned out, what they did with this, they cut it into segments and they put it on a show. It must have been about 2 months later, before and after every commercial. You saw a bit of my blurbing, a bit, and with bottles of horseradish all over the place. Probably the biggest bit of publicity that we ever had was from the David Letterman Show. We bought a mustard company just before we moved to Hempstead. We moved to Hempstead at the end of 1993, beginning of 94. We bought a mustard company and we set up shop in Hempstead. And we started making mustard. First, we were making it in gallons. Baker's was the name of the company that we bought. And we set up the manufacturing plant in the Hempstead plant with the horseradish and duck sauce and borscht. And now we're making mustard also. The Nathans also we made. But I saw a retail size of horseradish, not a retail size, I saw a gallon. This is what I saw at Shea Stadium. I was a big time baseball fan, major Met fan from 1962. And I saw our mustard was in Shea Stadium. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. I was absolutely floored by it, so flipped out. And Shortly after, I get a phone call from the Mets saying, we have your mustard in the ballpark. I want you to do business with us. And I said, really? Come and see us. I make an appointment, and I go to see Paul Danforth of the Mets. I pass the offices of Fred Wilpon, Nelson Doubleday, and in awe, I see on the side, I see pictures, and I see yearbooks, and it's like a dream. It's a dream. And I'm talking to the Paul Danforth, and he said, "You have our mustard there anyway. Why don't we do business with you?" I said, "Oh, sure. That's a great idea. Let's do business. I love the fan, and takes over. There's a businessman, and then there's the fan, and it's a fine line sometimes. You go over that line. Wham! I was over that line. Sure." So he gives me a price to put in an ad in the Met yearbook and the Met program. Now you can't be in it. Put an ad in the Met program. You got a 200-page book. And no one keeps score. You can't, because the scorecards, you just can't. Back then it was manageable. We put an ad in there in 1997. And what we did was we changed the label on the gallons from that blue label you saw to this, where it said Gold's Deli Mustard. And it's like we started a new item. Let's see, where is that? Now we had retail. In the stores, we put this item. We had that gallon that said Gold's in the ballpark. Plus, we had those little packets. The packets that you need a screwdriver to open. But everyone that gets a hot dog at the ballpark, they'd also get a packet, and the packet says Gold's. The packet says Gold's mustard. So it was a great advertising vehicle. What do you sell more of, or what is more consumed? What are the items that are most consumed in a ballpark or an arena? Beer and hot dogs back then. Now you have all these boutique restaurants. So I thought that was a wonderful idea. My partners didn't necessarily agree with me, but we went from that. We also did Passover Haggadahs. There's a lot more to talk about. It was actually a borscht eating contest that we had in Coney Island to tie in with the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. We manufactured Nathan's mustard. In 1962, Stan Fischler, who was a good friend of the family, I started a Mets fan club at 14 years old, and Stan put a story in the Journal American about this 14-year-old that's starting a fan club. And letters from Tom Meany referencing Casey Stengel. I actually had, in 1961, I requested season ticket information for the Mets, who were starting in 1962. I still have this envelope dated December 1961. This was a season ticket application where if you bought a season ticket, it would cost you $250. For one season ticket, 81 games. Now it would cost you $250 for one ticket. I had an opportunity to meet Jimmy Breslin, which we'll talk about at another time. We're sort of running out of time. This is what the mustard gallon looked like in the ballparks, and we wound up selling it to the Islanders and Barclays Center and Madison Square Garden. We got involved with the Staten Island Yankees, the Brooklyn Cyclones, the Tampa Bay Rays. A lot of teams were handling that. This is what the ad looked like at the beginning. That was in the program in the yearbook. That's what our first bobblehead doll. In 2002, we started a string of 13 consecutive years where we did a bobblehead promotion with the Mets. When we did a bobblehead promotion with the Mets, they gave us, as part of the perks, they gave us a luxury suite for that one day of the promotion. They gave us a 30-person suite for one day. And I would invite the buyers, in addition to the family, I'd invite the buyers to come into the suite. And they loved it. They loved getting the dolls. And the dolls I would give out, each year I would give the dolls out to the buyers. And they developed a collection of all the dolls. This is when Kaz Matsui, who was Japanese and was going to be a superstar in the Mets, he wound up being super stiff. But what they did that year, they allowed us, we started with wasabi. They allowed us to put the wasabi in the ballpark when we did the Kaz Matsui promotion. They did press conferences. We got a lot of press from the bobblehead promotions. These are a bunch of them. This picture actually showed up in the New York Times, and when they talked about bobbleheads, and it was the curse of the bobblehead, which was a very funny story, which I need a whole session to talk about how every bobblehead we picked, from Mike Piazza, who was never had a good year again, to John Franco, who injured himself the following year, to Kaz Matsui, who was never any good, to Pedro Martinez, who a year later started getting injured, and he started getting downhill. David Wright, David Wright was the only one that went on to have a career, but look what happened to him. Pedro, and it's turned into amazing things. Sports Illustrated took the Pedro Martinez bobblehead, and they took a picture of it. They put a picture of it in Sports Illustrated. We didn't pay for this ad. This wasn't an ad, but it sure said Golds on it. Advertising was so important. This is the Hall of Fame. This is Cooperstown. I had sent bobblehead dolls of the whole set of them, including David Wright and Pedro Martinez, to Cooperstown. I got the name of the person at Cooperstown who to send it to. And he sends me back. He said, David Wright and Pedro Martinez are potential Hall of Famers. So I got a lifetime pass to Cooperstown because I submitted as a donor those bobblehead dolls. The Library of Congress put the Mike Piazza bobblehead in their exhibit for the Baseball Americana. They put Mike Piazza, and what does it say down there? You can't really get a good look at it. Golds. So Golds is in the Library of Congress. Can you believe that? Some of the other bobbleheads, Paul Duca press conference. This was the last bobblehead at Shea Stadium in 2008 with Johan Santana. When the Mets had the Madoff problem, I got some press from Newsday, put a story in it because I was a crazy Met fan and that I want to buy the Mets. Sounds good, right? But we got good press. I have a George Steinbrenner story. Jonathan, nod your head. You have about 7 minutes to tell a George Steinbrenner story. No. We want to do some questions and answers. What do you think?
Yeah, we should probably do questions and answers.
Okay, let's switch. There's a great story with Steinbrenner, which we'll tell another time. But what I'm doing now is Bud Harrelson came to the place, took a lot of pictures. I'm just scrolling through a lot. We did something with the Islanders, the Garden. Barclays when it opened. The Rays, ads, Brooklyn Cyclones, Keith Spain Park. We put in. I wanted it on the foul line. Our ad. Red Sox. We did stuff. Interesting story with the Red Sox. In Boston, they had so many cocktail sauces. They didn't want us until we became the cocktail sauce of the Boston Red Sox. Then they said, "Oh, really? Sure, we'll take you in." Because I was able to put the logo on it. We did a Babe Ruth pitching bobblehead. And this is what, if I can get to the end, that's my son. So my daughter there. Let's get to that last picture, which is the best. I want to tell a Doc Gooden story, but I won't. I will tell a Doc Gooden story. That's a quick one. But this is what I'm doing now. But let me tell you the Doc Gooden story. Doc Gooden was our bobblehead in 2014. There was supposed to be a sign up in the field of Doc Gooden, of Gold's Horseradish. Supposed to be a sign. Wasn't there. We were in the suite. All the family was there. Customers were there. And a Met exec was there. And I said, "Where's the sign?" And she didn't. She said the sign was not there. And she starts texting away to try to find someone to fix it. And I said, "You want to make good on this? This is where the fan, I could have said, give me my money back. They didn't put the sign up. But the fan enters into it. And I said, if you can get Dwight Gooden to come into the suite, everything's fine." So she's texting away. And finally, she says, 10 minutes, Doc's going to be here. Doc Gooden walks into the suite, signs whatever everyone has, family, friends, they all love me for this. The best thing I ever did in my 45 years at Gold's was get Doc Gooden into the suite. They signed the dolls. Everyone had a bobblehead doll. He signed the boxes, the doll. He signed the dolls. He was so wonderful. And never forget that day. But this is what I'm doing now. That's my granddaughter. Thank you all very much. We can do questions now if you'd like to.
Yeah, I'm going to open it up. I do want to tell you, Mark, I was there for that bobblehead day. Now that you mention it,
Doc?
I was there for that one.
Wow. You didn't see the sign there.
Nope, I didn't. So I'm going to go ahead and allow folks to unmute themselves if they would like. They can go ahead and ask questions.
No, I can't find it. I just want to say it was a wonderful history, visual and oral, and it just brought the whole goals that sits on my Shabbos table every week to life. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Seema.
Hi, Marilyn.
So, Mark, were you primarily in the New York area?
We started New York Metro, and we wound up selling throughout the East, and we would hit we're in California, Los Angeles, San Francisco. We were in Chicago. We would hit major spots. You wouldn't find us in Boise. I don't think Jonathan found us in Tennessee, unless he went into, he always had the areas that connected, it might have been in Winn-Dixie or Publix that went into Georgia. We were in Georgia, in Publix, in Atlanta, the Atlanta warehouse, and Kennesaw also had a warehouse in Georgia that we were there. But mostly New York Metro throughout the Eastern Seaboard.
So outside of New York is, distributors, I guess.
It was distributors, and we sold overseas. We had sold product into Australia. We sold product into Israel. We were in the United Kingdom. We had a distributor in London, Sova Foods, and we sold to someone in South Africa. I love dealing with people out of the country. Even though it wasn't a lot of product, it just meant so much that we were able to sell to these people. There was a festival there was a food show that was held in New York every year called Kosher Fest. And that's when all of the distributors from the country and the world would show up there. And we always had a booth there. And that's where I would see some of these people and get some of this business. We sold, we were selling into Paris. There's a China story. I believe we sold to China. I sent orders that were supposed to be shipped to China. That's a whole long story involving diverting, where a customer of ours bought it, saying that it was going, a broker purchased it and sold it to a local guy instead of sending it to China. That's diverting to get a better price, because I negotiated something because it was going to China. Opportunity to sell thousands of cases in China. So, but we did sell everywhere in the country. Spotty once you got out of the New York Metro, once you got out of the Eastern Seaboard, really. We sold throughout Baltimore, Washington.
Right. So our problem, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Georgia and Florida.
Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Randy.
have two quick questions. Well, which one of the Golds in the family was interested in magic?
My father, Morris. Yeah, were you
Yeah,
a part of his magic club?
Yeah.
Really? What's your last name?
We're stuck at Berkowitz.
Randy
We're
Berkowitz?
still, yeah, I used to manufacture magic too. We live in Monticello, but we also live in East Meadow. Right now, I'm speaking to you from East Meadow.
So you
But,
probably
I
came
know
to my
that-
father's house.
Hmm?
You probably came to my father's house for the magic club. Was that?
I was not there.
Oh.
We overlapped, but yeah. But of course, your dad was famous as being interested in magic. And one other question I'm asking, if it's not out of line, I'm in East Meadow now, and I'm the president of East Meadow Jewish Center. I love your presentation. Is it rude for me to ask whether or not I could reach you to maybe give this presentation to the East Meadow Jewish Center?
Love to do it. Marcus N. Gold at Gmail. Marcus N. Gold at Gmail.
N is in M Gold.
Neil. N is in Neil.
Gmail. Yeah, I apologize for getting nosy, but it's an absolute pleasure.
No, glad to do it. Are you kidding? It's great. Let's see if I can get back to it.
Can I ask a question? What connection do you have to Sullivan County?
We sold Ellenville Wholesale Grocers. We sold to Stolman Fish in South Fallsburg. We sold to a Rappaport Fish. Those are the names that come to mind. Some of the distributors that would pick up in Brooklyn and also on Long Island, and that's how we would get into the hotels. Of course, the hotel business was huge in all those years ago, but
well, now personally that you did this lovely presentation, did someone know you and inquire if you would do it, or do you have a connection?
Oh, the Seabells, Alan and Sarah Seabell. I hope I mentioned them at the beginning, but we're here because of Alan and Sarah Seabell, who are close friends for
I don't know them.
4 years. You know them, Seabells?
No.
More than I've been at Horseradish. I know Alan.
We have a home in Loch Sheldrick, but I grew up in Monticello every summer and on Greenview Avenue. So I have a long history with with Sullivan County.
And Alan and I go back to when we were little. I guess we were little then, right? It's enough years ago to.
So now,
Mark,
Yes.
Mark, hi, Art and Sandy, wonderful presentation. One question I asked, yeah, you were advertising horseradish, and in small print was chocolate syrup. Is that just another sideline? You didn't mix horseradish with chocolate syrup, did you?
It's funny, chocolate syrup. No, well, probably it tastes good. Horseradish, you put in some chocolate and freeze it up. Frozen chocolate with horseradish in it, delicious. But we did make cocktail sauce. This is before World War II. We made chocolate syrup before World War II, but sugar became so expensive that they could not keep up with it. That was a brief period of time. And I have great labels of chocolate syrup labels, the beautiful labels. But we did have it on our letterhead. Is that you were referring to that letterhead that you saw, right?
Yeah.
so is LaSalle
Wonderful.
the owner and distributor and manufacturer?
Who am I speaking to?
Oh, this is
What's
me.
your first name?
Robert.
Robert.
Bob?
What is that? No.
No, LaSalle is a private equity firm. LaSalle is a private equity firm in Chicago that purchased our company in 2015. And I believe it's in the works for them to sell it again. That's what the press says anyway.
Who's making the product now under your label?
Well, they're still making it now. They're going to stop. And I don't know what's going to happen after that.
Oh, so they're more than an equity firm. They went into manufacturing.
They're an equity firm that they have LLCs under them.
Okay.
That we're part of. Gold's is part of that, and we're never too thrilled with how it developed with them. That in 5 years, that was something that was more than it is now. Anyway, it's a long story for another time with a lawyer around.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, no, I can, because I know the products are different. I mean, we've been getting the cocktail sauce for years and the horseradish. The cocktail sauce is a different product than when you guys made it, you know. So.
Yeah, it was the best cocktail sauce that existed when we made it. My father had these spices from somewhere that we kept using for all the years. They probably found someone who spices that are cheaper. That's what my guess is.
Maybe you got to buy the company back so it can be Hamish again.
yeah, it's a good idea. Get some people involved, right?
Yeah.
Can handle that stuff.
Yeah.
Tina, can you hear me?
I barely hear you.
Oh, I don't know why.
Yell.
Huh?
Yell.
Wait. No, I just wanted to congratulate you and your family on having such a widely successful, wonderful business for so many, many years. That's incredible.
Thank you for that.
And also, I moved from Manhattan. I grew up in Manhattan, but I moved to Brooklyn. I lived in Dyker Heights. I know all those supermarkets, the McDonald's Avenue, the whole bit.
Oh, great. You know the whole area. Yeah, it was a good time back then.
Yeah.
It was busy, always busy.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Sometime I hope you have more time and we're there to hear some of your stories. They're great.
Sure. I have to tell you, the Doc Gooden story I raced through, that was a good one. But there was the Jimmy Breslin story, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
That you probably, many of you know Jimmy Breslin, the writer. And he was a big sports person, big baseball person. He wrote a book in 1962 called Can't Anyone Here Play This Game? About the 62 Mets. And the 62 Mets were a terrible, terrible team. They were the worst team. He came to our house in Canarsie on December 31st, 1962. And he was looking for that crazy person who has a Mets fan club. I had started a Mets fan club when I was a kid. And he wanted, so it's New Year's Eve, and he came in sloshed. And my mother said, what? And but she knew Jimmy Breslin. And I remember being awakened to come down and talk to Jimmy Breslin. It was a great time. In 1986, 24 years later, Breslin wanted to know what happened to that crazy kid. And I was now in 86 was a Mets great year. It was a wonderful year for the Mets. And he wanted to know what happened to me then. And it turned into a great story in the Daily News about me. And it was great press because it was about Horseradish. And it was, these Mets put tears in his eyes with the play on tears with Horseradish. It was so terrific. There was a television show after that that I was on. I was on the same show as Spike Lee, believe it or not, back in 86. And it was just great publicity for us. So much. And my father always taught, they always look for the publicity. When a writer calls, talk to the writer, make sense, make it interesting, and get the promotion, get the advertising. It's all in the perception, which is something that I've always done. And I've tried to just do that through all these years.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
All right. Well, if no one has any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And Jonathan, thanks. Alan, thanks for setting the whole thing up. And I hope Connie was around to watch it. Was she around, Jonathan?
I don't believe she was.
Oh, too bad.
But I'll certainly let her know.
Love to do this again anytime. Thank you, folks.
Hey.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.